All right. So we're back and ready to dig into some more growing together.
Yeah, this is great stuff.
This time, we're diving into Chapter 5, Plant Selection and Gardening Techniques, which I think is something that a lot of people, well,
It's essential.
it's going to make or break your garden, right?
Absolutely, especially when we're talking about community gardens where you've got a lot of different
A lot of different needs.
hands in the pot and
Sure.
different
Yeah.
visions for what the garden should be.
Right. So how do you get everybody on the same page?
Well, it all starts with choosing the right plants, right?
Okay, so the handbook really emphasizes native and climate-appropriate species. And this is something that we've touched on before.
Absolutely.
But why is it so important for community gardens in particular?
I think for community gardens, it really boils down to sustainability and resilience. These plants have evolved.
So it's less work.
It's less work, it's less inputs, you're not having to constantly amend the soil, you're not having to
Baby them as much?
baby them. Exactly. They're adapted to the local pests, the local diseases.
But what if I have my heart set on growing, something a little more exotic, something that, maybe isn't native to my area?
I understand that. We all have those plants that just capture our imagination, right? But that's where...
It's passion fruit or something.
Yeah, passion fruit, exactly. But that's where understanding your hardiness zone comes in. This system basically classifies.
So do you just Google that?
You can totally just Google hardiness zone, put in your zip code, and it'll tell you which zone you're in.
Oh, that's easy. Okay.
Super easy. And it's important because it tells you the average minimum winter temperature for your region.
Okay.
So you can choose plants that can actually survive those cold snaps.
So even if it's not native, if it's hardy, then it can be part of the game.
Exactly. And the handbook even points out that you can create microclimates within your garden, right? You might have a sunny south-facing slope that warms up quickly in the spring. So you might be able to push the boundaries a little bit.
So I could have like a little tropical corner if I've got the right spot.
You could have a little tropical corner. Exactly.
Oh, it's fun.
So, it's not always about being super strict.
So we've got native plants, we've got hardiness zones.
Mhm.
What are some other factors that community gardens should consider when they're choosing their plants?
Well, I think it's really helpful to think about the purpose of the garden, right?
Hmm.
Are you primarily growing food?
Is it food? Is it flowers? Is
Will
it
this donate?
just for the bees?
Is it for the community to come and enjoy?
Or is it all of those things?
Right. And often it's a combination, right?
Yeah.
And growing together really encourages that, having that diversity.
So variety is the spice of life and also of a community garden.
Exactly. A diverse garden is a healthy garden.
Okay, I like that.
And that brings us to this really cool concept that I think a lot of people are fascinated by. It's companion planting.
Ooh, companion planting. Okay, tell me more.
So companion planting is essentially strategically pairing plants.
They're friends.
They're friends. They benefit each other. So, for example, if you plant basil near your tomatoes, basil can actually deter pests.
It's like pest control and extra flavor. Two birds, one stone.
Exactly. And there's so many different combinations. Planting marigolds near your beans can help repel certain beetles.
Okay, so how do you know which plants are good companions?
Well, that's where a little bit of research comes in. Growing Together has a whole section on companion planting.
It does, okay.
It does, yeah. There are also lots of resources online, and you can even ask, at your local nursery.
So you just ask the plant people.
Ask the plant people. They're usually full of knowledge.
And now this companion planting, it ties into another concept that the book mentions, which is guilds.
Yes. Plot guilds.
So tell me, what's the difference between companion planting and a plant guild?
So companion planting is really just about those pairings, right? You've got two plants that are helping each other out. A guild takes it to a whole nother level. It's like creating a little mini ecosystem within your garden.
So it's like a whole community of plants working together.
Exactly. It's a community of plants working together.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example.
Okay. Let's imagine you want to plant a fruit tree, right? So in a fruit tree guild, you might have your fruit tree as the centerpiece, and then around it, you might plant nitrogen-fixing plants like clover, which will help enrich the soil. You might plant aromatic herbs.
To deter pests, right?
To deter pests, exactly. Things like lavender, rosemary. You might even include some flowering plants like yarrow, which will attract beneficial insects.
Oh, so it's like a multi-layered approach.
Multi-layered, it's beautiful, it's functional.
I love it.
And it's really working with nature, not against it.
So it's about creating a little world within your garden. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's super cool. And you can get really creative with it. There's no one right way to do a guild. It's about
Trial and error.
Trial and error, observation.
So pay attention. See what works in your space. That's good advice. Okay, so we've talked about choosing the right plants based on your region, your hardiness zone.
Thinking about guilds.
Thinking about guilds and companion planting. But what about timing? I mean, we have to consider the seasons, right?
Absolutely. We can't just plant whatever, whenever. And growing together really dedicates a good chunk of this chapter to seasonal planting and planning.
Because I'm assuming the goal is to have a garden that's producing something.
Year-round.
Most of the year, if not year-round, right?
Ideally, yes.
So how do you do that?
Well, it's really about understanding your local climate and then planning accordingly. So it starts with knowing, when your first and last frost dates are.
Okay.
And then choosing crops that are appropriate for each season.
So cool season crops, warm season crops, knowing the difference.
Exactly. So, for example, in the early spring, you might be planting cool season crops like lettuce and spinach, peas. Those can handle a little bit of frost. And then as it warms up, you transition to your warm season crops like tomatoes, peppers, squash. And then as fall approaches, you can either go back to some of those cool season crops or
probably extend this season a little bit if you
extend the season, right?
Yeah.
Use some techniques like cold frames or
little mini greenhouses, yeah.
Exactly.
So you can kind of stretch those seasons a little bit.
Exactly. And you can be harvesting food, well into the fall and even winter in some cases.
That's impressive.
So it's really about playing that seasonal game.
Now, I'm guessing it's not just about picking the right plants for each season. It's also about strategy, right?
Yes, absolutely. And growing together really emphasizes the importance of succession planting. Have you ever heard of that?
I have, but explain it for the folks at home.
So succession planting is basically staggering your plantings to ensure a continuous harvest throughout the season.
Okay.
So instead of planting all your lettuce at once, you might plant, a few seeds every couple of weeks. That way you've
got a constant supply coming up.
A continuous supply.
So you're not overwhelmed with lettuce all at once, and then you have none.
Exactly. And you can do that with a lot of different crops, not just lettuce. You can do it with beans, with carrots.
So you're always kind of got something coming up.
Always got something coming up, exactly. Keeps things interesting.
Keeps your plate full. I like it.
And your community fed.
That's the most important part. So we've talked about choosing the right plants. We've talked about timing and strategy. But now we have to deal with the inevitable, the pests.
Uh-oh, the uninvited guests.
Yes, those uninvited guests that always seem to crash the garden party.
The bane of every gardener's existence, right?
So growing together takes a very specific approach to pest and disease management. Tell me about it.
Well, the handbook is a big fan of taking a proactive approach. It's all about empowering your plants.
To be strong.
To be resilient. And to do that, you have to create a healthy garden ecosystem that is naturally more resistant to those pests and diseases.
So it's like building a garden with good immune system from the get-go.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. I like that approach. But how do we actually do that?
Well, it all starts with this concept called integrated pest management, or IPM.
All right, break that down for me. IPM.
Okay, so IPM is really about taking a holistic view of your garden, and it's about combining a variety of different strategies to keep those pest populations in check.
So not just one thing, but a whole bunch of different things working together.
It's like having a multi-pronged defense system for your garden.
I like it. Okay, so what are some of these strategies that are part of IPM?
So, some of them are things we've already talked about. Crop rotation, for example, is a fantastic...
Right, so move things around. Don't let those pests get comfortable.
Don't let them get comfortable, exactly. And then there are things like physical barriers, like using row covers, which basically create a protective shield over your plants.
So it's like a little insect screen.
Yeah, exactly. Keeps those little munching mouths away from your seedlings.
I like it. But what about encouraging the good guys?
Yeah.
The beneficial insects that we want in our garden?
Absolutely. That's another crucial element of IPM. And Growing Together talks about this a lot. It's about attracting those beneficial insects.
Like ladybugs and all those lovely creatures.
Like ladybugs, lacewings, those parasitic wasps that just take care of those caterpillars.
So it's like inviting the garden's little superheroes to come and take care of business.
Exactly. And you do that by providing them with food, shelter, and a welcoming environment.
Okay, so how do you make your garden welcoming to those little superheroes?
Plant diversity is key. So, having a variety of flowering plants, especially those rich in nectar and pollen, is going to attract.
So don't just plant vegetables, plant some flowers too.
Exactly.
Okay, I like it. But what if, you've done all of that and you still find yourself battling some pests? Does the handbook offer any advice for those moments?
It does. It has a whole section on natural pest deterrents and remedies. And this is where I think things get really fun, because a lot of these remedies
You can make it home.
you can make at home. They're things that you probably already have in your pantry.
Ooh. Give me some examples.
Okay, so one of the simplest and most effective remedies for soft-bodied insects like aphids is a simple spray of water with a few drops of dish soap.
Dish soap.
Dish soap.
Really?
Yeah. It basically disrupts their outer coating, and it leads to dehydration.
So it's like a soapy demise for those little pests.
Exactly.
Okay, that's great. What else can we use from our kitchen?
Well, garlic is a fantastic pest repellent. You can blend a few cloves with water, strain the mixture, and you have a spray.
Garlic spray. Okay, that's a new one.
Your spray.
So it's good for cooking, it's good for warding off vampires, and it's good for protecting your plants.
It's a multi-purpose superhero.
Multi-purpose. I love it. Okay, but what if you need something a little bit stronger, something a little bit more potent?
Well, then, Growing Together recommends neem oil, which is extracted from the neem tree. And it's really interesting because it acts as both.
The twofer.
It's a twofer. It's an insecticide and a fungicide.
Okay, so it's good for pests and diseases.
Exactly. So it can be very helpful in your organic pest management arsenal.
Okay, so neem oil. Noted. So we've got soap, we've got garlic, we've got neem oil. We're well armed for this battle.
We're ready.
We're ready for those pests.
We are.
But what about plant diseases?
Yeah.
Is the approach the same? Prevention first, and then natural remedies if needed.
Absolutely. Growing Together emphasizes that a healthy garden starts with healthy soil.
That's always the foundation.
Always. So proper watering, good air circulation, choosing disease-resistant varieties. These are all...
So give your plants a fighting chance from the beginning.
Exactly. Exactly. Give them a fighting chance. But of course, sometimes, despite our best efforts, diseases can still pop up.
They do.
And so the handbook offers some natural remedies for those situations as well. And one that I find really fascinating is compost tea.
Compost tea. Okay, tell me more.
So compost tea is essentially a liquid extract of compost. It's teeming with beneficial microorganisms, and when you spray it on your plants, it can help suppress those disease-causing organisms and just give your plants an overall boost.
It's like a probiotic shot for your garden.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, I love it. So we've got our IPM toolbox, we've got our arsenal of natural remedies, and we've got that healthy soil foundation. I'm feeling pretty good about facing those garden challenges. But let's move on to something a little bit more, well, exciting. Let's talk about maximizing our harvest.
Yes, let's get those yields up.
Let's get productive.
Let's go.
So Growing Together goes into some pretty interesting intensive gardening techniques.
It does. It's all about getting the most out of your space and your effort.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to become a garden ninja.
Let's do it.
Let's unleash the garden ninja within.
So, we were just talking about maximizing harvests and getting the most out of the garden.
Right. We want to be productive. We're talking community garden here. Lots of people to feed.
Absolutely. You want to make the most of every inch of that precious garden space. And Growing Together really dives into some...
And time.
And time, that's right. It dives into these intensive gardening techniques that help you do just that. One that I find particularly fascinating is square foot gardening.
Okay, I've heard of this, but I've never actually done it. So break it down for me. What is square foot gardening?
Basically, you're dividing your garden bed into 1 foot squares.
What?
Imagine like a grid system.
Like a life-size checkerboard?
Yeah, exactly. A life-size checkerboard for your veggies.
I love that visual.
And within each of those squares, you're going to plant a very specific number of plants based on their mature size.
Okay, so like how many? How do you know?
So for example, for something like a tomato plant, which gets pretty big, you might only plant 1 tomato plant per square.
Okay.
But for something like lettuce, which stays relatively small, you could plant, say, 4 lettuce plants in 1 square.
Well, that makes sense. You're really maximizing that space.
Exactly. You're not wasting any space. And you're giving each plant the room it needs to thrive.
So it's efficient, it's organized, and it's also It seems like it would be really easy to plan
It is.
if you're a beginner gardener.
Especially for beginners, you know exactly how many plants you need, how to space them out.
To just follow the grid.
Yeah, follow the grid, easy peasy.
I like it. I like it. But what if you're dealing with a really small space? Like maybe you're in an urban environment and you only have a patio or a balcony to work with.
Well, that's where vertical gardening comes in. And Growing Together really sings the praises of vertical gardening. It's all about training plants to grow up instead of out.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those. They're so cool, like those living walls.
Exactly, living walls. And you can do it on a smaller scale too, right? You can use trellises.
Or like those stacked planters.
Stacked planters, yeah. Anything that lets you create that vertical growing space.
And what kind of plants are best suited for vertical gardening?
Vining plants are your best friends here. So things like cucumbers, beans.
Oh, yeah, beans love to climb.
They love to climb. You can even grow tomatoes vertically. There are certain varieties that do really well with a little bit of support.
So you're essentially creating like a second story for your garden.
A second story garden, yeah.
I love it. And it seems like it would also improve air circulation, which is good for preventing diseases.
Absolutely. You get better airflow, better sunlight penetration.
Yeah.
It's a win-win.
Okay, so we've got square foot gardening for maximizing space in a traditional garden bed, and we've got vertical gardening for those who are working with limited ground space.
Right.
What other tricks does Growing Together have up its sleeve?
Well, there's another technique called intercropping, and it's all about planting different crops together in a way that benefits them both.
Okay, so give me an example of how that works.
So let's say you're planting tomatoes, which are a slower growing crop.
Okay.
You could plant something like lettuce, which grows much faster in between those tomato plants. The lettuce will be harvested long before the tomatoes need that extra space. Ah, that's so smart.
Right. And in the meantime, that lettuce is shading the soil, it's suppressing weeds, it's even helping to retain moisture. So both plants benefit.
So it's like a little symbiotic relationship.
Exactly. It's plant teamwork.
Plant teamwork. I love it. So we've got square foot gardening, we've got vertical gardening, we've got intercropping. It's like a whole arsenal of space-saving, productivity-boosting techniques.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, is all of this more work?
Well, I won't lie, it does require a bit more planning and attention to detail.
Yeah.
But the rewards are definitely worth it. And Growing Together does a great job of breaking these techniques down into manageable steps.
Okay, good.
It's not about doing everything at once.
Right. You don't have to go from zero to hero overnight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Choose one technique that resonates with you. Maybe start with a small area of your garden and just experiment. Experiment, see what works. That's great advice. Okay, so we've talked about choosing the right plants, planning for the seasons, maximizing our space, and battling those pesky pests and diseases. But I think we need to shift gears a bit and talk about something that's equally important, maybe even more important, the community aspect of community gardening.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, a community garden is about so much more than just growing plants. It's about growing community, fostering connections, creating a space where everyone feels welcome and empowered to contribute.
I love that. So let's dig into that. How does Growing Together guide us in creating that sense of community in a garden setting?
It really does. And Growing Together has some fantastic advice on how to build that sense of community. It all starts with making sure people know that the garden exists, that it's there for them.
Okay, so outreach, promotion, getting the word out. What are some effective strategies for that?
Well, the handbook suggests hosting community meetings or even like open houses at the garden.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, give people a chance to actually see the space, meet the gardeners.
Meet the people.
Yeah. And really get a feel for what the garden is all about. Flyers, posters, social media.
Social media is huge for that, yeah. Get those pictures circulating.
Absolutely. It's about getting the word out there and letting people know that they're welcome, that this is a space for them.
Right, so it's not just about getting them to the garden, it's about making them feel welcome and included once they're there.
Exactly. And that's where creating inclusive spaces comes in. And Growing Together is very intentional about this. It encourages gardens to be mindful of accessibility, both physical and social.
Okay, let's talk about accessibility. What are some practical steps
Yeah.
that gardens can take to make sure that everyone feels welcome and able to participate?
Well, on a practical level, making sure that pathways are wide enough for wheelchairs and strollers. Raised beds are fantastic.
Oh, for people with mobility issues, yeah.
Exactly. For people with mobility issues, it makes gardening so much more accessible. But accessibility is not just about physical accommodations. It's also about creating a welcoming and inclusive culture.
So what does that look like in a garden setting?
It's about using inclusive language, being mindful of different cultural backgrounds and perspectives, making sure that there are opportunities for people to connect, whether it's through shared meals or potlucks or just social gatherings. It's about fostering a sense of belonging.
So everyone feels like they have something to contribute
Yes.
and that their contributions are valued.
Exactly. Because everyone does have something to contribute, right?
Absolutely.
And we need to recognize and celebrate those contributions.
Okay, so we've got outreach, we've got inclusivity, but now we need to talk about how to actually make a community garden work, because it takes a lot of hands
It does.
to keep these things going.
A lot of hands, a lot of effort.
So how do you create that sense of shared responsibility?
That's such a good question.
Okay.
And growing together really emphasizes this, A successful community garden is not about a few people carrying all the weight. It's about everyone sharing the responsibility.
So how do you do that? How do you get everyone involved and feeling like they have a stake in the garden's success?
Well, the handbook recommends things like assigning tasks and responsibilities, making sure that everyone has a role to play, whether it's watering, weeding, harvesting, or even things like leading workshops or coordinating events.
Oh, yeah. So there's a job for everyone,
There's a job for everyone.
no matter what their interests or skills are?
Exactly. And that helps people feel valued. And it also makes sure that the work is distributed more evenly.
Right. So it's not just falling on a few people's shoulders.
Yeah.
But I imagine coordinating all of those different roles and responsibilities can be challenging.
It can be. And the handbook really emphasizes the importance of communication.
Communication is key, yeah.
So using things like shared calendars, online platforms, even just a simple whiteboard at the garden to keep track of tasks, schedules, who's responsible for what.
So that everyone's on the same page.
Everyone's on the same page, exactly.
That makes sense. Okay, so communication, shared responsibility, making sure that everyone feels included and valued. That's a great recipe for a strong and thriving garden community.
I think so, yeah. And I think one last thing I would add, and Growing Together mentions this as well, is the importance of conflict resolution skills. Because let's be honest, disagreements happen.
They do.
They happen in any community setting.
Yeah, people have different opinions, they have different ideas.
Exactly. And so it's important to have those skills to be able to listen to each other, to find common ground, and to focus on solutions that benefit the community as a whole.
So it's about turning those conflicts into opportunities for growth and understanding.
Absolutely.
That's a great point. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, both literally and figuratively. We've talked about choosing the right plants, planning for the seasons, dealing with pests and diseases, maximizing our harvest, and building a thriving community. Growing Together has given us so much to think about, and I, for one, am feeling incredibly inspired to get out there and get my hands dirty.
Me too. And I think the beauty of it is that you can take all of this information and apply it to your own garden, whether you're part of a community garden or you're just growing a few things in your backyard. It's all about connecting with nature, connecting with each other, and growing something beautiful.
That's a beautiful way to sum it up. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Growing Together.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this episode and that you feel inspired to get out there and cultivate your own little patches of green in the world.
Happy gardening, everyone.
Happy gardening!